stolen from Pennsylvania, buried as a Miami 5-year-old, Frances Slocum. Her golden hair blowing in the morning wind, was picked up by a Delaware warrior and placed on his shoulder. With one little hand, she pushed her hair out of her face, while the other reached out sadly toward her mother, a last painful moment that would stay with the Slocum family for 60 years. Her mother's loud cry filled the Wyoming Valley, mixing with the warriors' happy shouts as they disappeared into the thick Pennsylvania woods. Step into Native legends and history stories. Subscribe and tap the bell to stay connected as we uncover the hidden stories and forgotten chapters of America's fascinating history. It was July 3, 1778. The Wyoming Valley settlement in Pennsylvania lay in ruins still, shattered by a brutal massacre that had taken 300 settlers' lives. Smoke curled from the remains of scorched homes, marking where families had lived just days earlier. Among the few survivors brave enough to return were the Slocums, who rebuilt their cabin, not far from the Wilkes-Barre courthouse. The Delaware warriors moved like phantoms through the mountain forests. Their moccasined feet left no trace as they slipped between the trees, scouting isolated cabins for signs of weakness. At the Slocum homestead, they peered through cracks in the log walls, counting their targets a mother. For children and to visitors, the men of the family were away, toiling in distant fields, oblivious to the dozen painted warriors closing in on their home. Inside the cabin, Mrs. Slocum tended to her children, a 9-year-old daughter, a 13-year-old son, little Francis at 5, and a toddler barely 2.5. A young man named Kingsley and his son had stopped by a routine morning visit as they sharpened a knife on the family's whetstone. The steady scrape of steel against drowned out the faint footsteps outside. The first gunshot shattered the morning calm. Like a thunderclap, young Kingsley collapsed where he stood, the half-sharpened knife still gripped in his hand. In a cruel twist of fate, the warrior seized that very blade to scalp him. The 9-year-old daughter acted on instinct, scooping up her toddler brother and sprinting toward the fort. Her feet pounded the dirt as she ran. The warrior's laughter trailing her through the brush, her little brother clutched tightly to her chest. Back at the cabin, the warriors claimed their prizes, the Kingsley boy, 13-year-old Slocum, and little Francis. But when they noticed young Slocum's lameness, their plans shifted, perhaps swayed by Mrs. Slocum's desperate pleas, or perhaps seeing him as a hindrance to their swift escape. They left him behind. Their final captives were just two, the Kingsley boy and Francis, her fair hair as distinctive as a brand. The raid had lasted less than 15 minutes. One moment, Mrs. Slocum had been preparing breakfast. The next, she stood helpless as her youngest daughter was carried into the wilderness. The child's final act, brushing back her hair, reaching one small hand toward her mother, would become a haunting image etched into the family's memory, passed down through generations like an unhealed wound. The settlement was still reeling from this fresh horror when the warriors struck again. Just 1 month later, they returned to the Slocum homestead. This time, their brutality knew no limits. The elderly grandfather fell to their weapons, his scalp taken as a trophy. The lame boy, spared in the first raid, took a musket ball to his leg, a painful reminder he would carry for nearly 60 years. Until his dying day, the timing was merciless. Mrs. Slocum was heavy with child, a new life growing amidst so much death. This baby would be born into a family shattered by violence, never knowing their sister Frances except as a ghost haunting their mother's tears. The settlement offered what comfort they could, but for the Slocum family, life would forever be split into two eras: before that July morning and after. The Slocum brothers embarked on 4 separate journeys across the vast and untamed American frontier. They rode on horseback through thick forests, where wolves still howled under the moonlight, crossed endless prairies, where hostile tribes roamed freely, and ventured into remote Canadian territories, where few white men had ever set foot. Each trip drained their energy and pushed their determination to the limit. They sent out hundreds of letters to newspapers, local officials, and Indian agents. They spoke to traders, trappers, and anyone who might have heard of a white woman living among native tribes, yet for 6 decades, every clue led to a dead end. The turning point came unexpectedly. In 1838, a U.S. agent, traveling through the remote wilderness of Indiana, stopped at a Miami Indian settlement to rest his horse. The settlement was 300 miles from the nearest town, and the agent had been riding for 12 days straight. He noticed one wigwam stood out. It was larger than the others, with 8 strong horses tied outside, and at least 15 high-quality deerskins hanging on wooden racks inside. The agent met a well-off Miami family. The woman of the house immediately caught his eye. Her hair was light brown, unusual among the dark-haired Miami. As they shared a meal of venison and corn, he noticed her skin was noticeably fair beneath her traditional clothing. Speaking in the Miami language, he learned bits of her story. She remembered living in a wooden house near a river called the Susquehanna. She could recall the names and ages of her siblings: a sister who was 9, a brother who was 13, and a baby brother just 2 years old. Most importantly, she remembered her family name. The agent wrote a detailed letter to the Lancaster Gazette in Pennsylvania. He described the woman's appearance: about 5 feet 4 inches tall, around 75 years old, with light brown hair streaked with gray. He noted her wealth: 8 horses, dozens of deer, silver bracelets, and a spacious wigwam. The letter included her fragmented memories of the Susquehanna and the names, but, due to a series of delays at the newspaper office, this vital information sat untouched for 2 years. When the letter finally appeared in print, in 1837, it reached the youngest Slocum brother, the same toddler who had been carried to safety during the raid 60 years earlier. He recognized the details immediately. Within 3 days, he had gathered a search party. His eldest sister, now in her late 60s, insisted on joining, despite the dangers ahead. They sent word to another brother in Ohio, born after to meet them along the way. The journey to Indiana was grueling. They rode through 300 miles of untamed land, often sleeping on the ground, and surviving on dried meat and hard bread. They crossed 5 major rivers and navigated through territories with no roads. Their horses stumbled over hidden routes and sank into swampy mud after 15 exhausting days. They reached the last white settlement. From there, they rode 9 more miles into Miami territory. The elder sister carried a key detail that would confirm Frances's identity. When Frances was 4, her brother had accidentally hammered off her first fingernail in the family's blacksmith shop. This became their surest way to recognize her. They found the wigwam exactly as described, a large sturdy structure with horses and furs, showcasing the family's prosperity. Inside sat a 75-year-old woman. Her light hair had grayed, but still stood out among the Miami. She wore a traditional dress, decorated with silver brooches, her face painted in the Miami style. Through an interpreter, they began their questions. She remembered living by the Susquehanna River. She recalled having 4 siblings. When asked about her fingernail, she replied without hesitation, "My older brother struck it off with his hammer when I was a small child in the shop." The siblings broke into tears at this confirmation. But Frances, now called McKinnick, remained calm. They spoke her Christian name, but she showed no recognition until they repeated it several times. Then a faint smile crossed her face, as if recalling a distant dream. It was the first time in 60 years she had heard that name. The reunion revealed how deeply Frances had changed. She couldn't speak a word of English. She didn't know her age or understand the concept of counting years. When asked about Sundays, she showed no understanding of weekly cycles, a fact that deeply troubled her Puritan-raised siblings. Her life story came out through the interpreter. The Delaware had raised her until adulthood. She first married a Delaware man who either died or left her, then married a Miami chief. She had 2 daughters, both now married with families of their own. The contrast between the siblings was striking. The brothers paced the wigwam, overwhelmed with emotion after their 60-year search. The eldest sister wept openly, touching Frances's hands and face, but Frances sat still and quiet, watching their emotional outbursts with the curiosity of a stranger. The family ties that had driven her siblings across countless miles meant nothing to her now. Her life as a Miami woman was complete. She owned more than 20 horses and was known as a skilled rider. When she agreed to visit her newfound relatives, she demonstrated this skill. She bridled her horse with ease, mounted it in the Miami style, and rode through dense forests without hesitation. At night, she simply wrapped herself in a blanket, and slept on the floor, refusing the offered bed. Her 2 daughters lived nearby in traditional Miami homes. Like their mother, they wore deerskin clothes and cowskin headdresses. Neither they nor their husbands spoke English. They lived the Miami way, hunting, trading furs, and raising horses. Frances hadn't just joined the Miami people. She had created a new branch of the tribe. Through her daughters, the siblings had to accept that, while they had found Frances' body, her American identity was gone forever. The 5-year-old girl who had reached out for her mother on that tragic morning no longer existed. In her place stood a Miami woman who saw her blood relatives as curious strangers from a world she no longer knew. The Slocum siblings made one last effort to close the 60-year gap between them and their long-lost sister. They painted a vivid picture of their comfortable life back in Pennsylvania, a grand house waiting for her by the Susquehanna River, servants to care for her every need, and fine clothes to replace her deerskin dress. They even offered to bring her daughters along, promising to build them proper homes and provide for their families. The wealth of 3 successful siblings would guarantee their comfort. But Frances, now Mechaniqua, refused. With quiet resolve through the interpreter, her words revealed how deeply she had become part of the Miami people. The Indians were kind to me. They took me in as a child, taught me their ways, and gave me a home. She spoke of her late husband, the Miami chief Shapank, and a promise she had made on his deathbed. She had vowed to stay with his people until her own death. The story of her marriage to Shapank unfolded through the interpreter's careful translation. Years earlier, Mechaniqua had found the young warrior, badly wounded by the roadside. She and her foster parents brought him to their lodge, where she nursed him back to health. Over many months, Shep and Kana proved himself a skilled hunter, providing for the family even as he recovered. When he regained his strength and spoke of leaving, her foster parents convinced him to stay. They gave their fair-skinned daughter to him in marriage, a union that tied him to their family forever. The youngest Slocum brother, now 62, couldn't accept this final separation that fall. He made a 5th trip to Indiana, bringing gifts for his tawny sister, blankets, cooking pots, and silver jewelry. He spoke of petitioning Congress to protect her land rights. His fears were justified. Other Miami tribes had already been forced westward, their lands taken by white settlers. He insisted that if such displacement came to Mackinac people, a piece of land must be set aside for her and her descendants. The bond between brother and sister defied easy explanation. Though she remained a stranger to his way of life, though she refused to return to their childhood home, his heart ached for the little girl torn from their mother's arms 61 years earlier. Each visit revealed more about her life. She ran her household with quiet efficiency, directed farm work, and oversaw horse trading. Her daughters had married well within the tribe, their children carrying both Miami heritage and their mother's fair features. Of young Kingsley, the other child taken that bloody morning in 1778, no trace was ever found. The Delaware warriors, who had laughed while chasing his sister, had shown him no mercy. Death, likely swift, had probably come soon after his capture. His family's search ended where Frances's story began, in the deep forests of the frontier. Mackinac lived 10 more years after the reunion, passing away in her home along the Mississippi River in March 1847. She was 74, her life bridged to worlds, but remained firmly rooted in Miami soil. Even as her biological family grieved their inability to bring her back, she stayed true to her adopted people. Until her final breath, the legacy of Frances Slocum, known to her Miami family as lived on long after her death. On May 17, 19, a towering, white bronze monument was erected over her grave near the village of Peoria in Miami County, Indiana. The dedication ceremony brought Slocum descendants from Michigan, Ohio, and states farther east. They stood side by side with members of the Miami tribe, some traveling from as far as their Kansas reservation, to honor the woman who had lived between worlds. The monument became a meeting place for cultures. Slocum family members in fine Eastern clothes mingled with Miami tribespeople in traditional dress. The ceremony included both Christian prayers and Miami rituals. Stories were shared in English and the Miami language, passing down the tale of a 5-year-old girl who became a Miami woman. Yet Even this effort to remember her sparked debate about identity and belonging. Modern scholars question how Frances Slocum's story has been told. A 2022 thesis from Indiana University argues focusing on her as a lost white sister erases her identity as a full member of Miami society. The thesis points out that markers often emphasize her captivity, while downplaying her 70 years as a Miami woman. This debate reflects bigger questions about American identity. Frances Slocum's transformation from a frontier captive to a respected Miami woman challenges simple narratives about cultural belonging. She wasn't just a white woman living among native people. She became fully Miami in language, custom, and loyalty. Her descendants carried both Miami blood and her fair features, a living testament to America's complex